The Chesapeake and Ohio Canal towpath in October is a place of contradictions. Crisp air carries the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. Sunlight filters through skeletal trees, painting the ground in gold and shadow. The Potomac River whispers here, steady and ancient, as if keeping secrets. But on October 12, 2002, that tranquil stretch of wilderness, a place where hikers lose themselves in the crunch of gravel underfoot and the chatter of distant blue jays, became the backdrop of a horror story that still chills this community to its core. It was dawn. A jogger, breath visible in the cold, rounded a bend near mile marker 42. Something caught their eye, a flash of color in the underbrush, too vivid to belong to the muted autumn palette. They slowed, hesitated, then stepped closer. What they found wasn't just a body. It was a person, a man lying twisted in the weeds, his face battered beyond recognition, his hands curled like he'd clawed at the dirt in his final moments. A silver wedding band glinted faintly on his finger. A teacher's ID card, tucked in his wallet, identified him. Jeffrey Scott Rowland, 42, Charlestown Middle School. Police would later confirm he'd been strangled, beaten with a blunt object, and left like roadside debris. But the real shock wasn't just the brutality. It was the ordinariness of the victim. Jeffrey wasn't a gambler, wasn't involved in drugs, wasn't the type to wander into danger. He was a man who graded papers at his kitchen table, who mowed his lawn every Saturday, who'd spent the night before his death watching SpongeBob reruns with his kids. So why him? Why here? The answers never came. No murder weapon surfaced. No witnesses came forward, at least none who could unravel the truth. The jogger's 911 call that morning sparked a decades-long fever dream of dead ends and false hope. Tips trickled in, then dried up. Suspects were questioned, then cleared. Even the forensics, the DNA, the fibers, the faint traces of someone else's rage, led nowhere. All that remained was the where. A stretch of towpath now avoided by locals after dark. A crime scene without a crime. A teacher, a father, a neighbor, reduced to a name on a cold case file. 22 years later, the same questions linger like fog over the Potomac. Who wanted Jeffrey Rowland dead? And why does a killer still walk free, hidden in plain sight, in a town where everyone knows everyone, but no one knows this? Jeffrey Rowland wasn't a man who lived in extremes. He existed in the quiet, unremarkable spaces between headlines. The kind of person you'd pass in the grocery store and forget by the time you reached the checkout. But to those who knew him, he was the glue holding ordinary days together. At Charlestown Middle School, he taught 8th grade history. Not with textbooks and memorization, but with stories. He'd act out the Boston Tea Party, stomping on imaginary crates of tea while students howled with laughter. After class, he'd linger in the gym, shooting hoops with kids who needed a listener more than a coach. Mr. Rowland never made you feel small, one former student recalls. Even when you got the answer wrong, he'd say, "Hey, at least you're thinking. That's half the battle." At home, his life was quieter. A divorce in 1999 left him raising 2 daughters, Emily and Sarah, in a modest ranch house on Sycamore Street. Mornings were chaos: burnt toast, mismatched socks, last-minute permission slips. Nights were for board games and bad TV. His ex-wife, Linda, described him as a gentle soul, the type who'd apologize to a spider before sweeping it outside. Neighbors knew him by his routines. The way he'd wave from his porch every morning, coffee mug in hand, or how he'd spend Saturdays methodically trimming hedges into perfect rectangles. There were no skeletons in his closet, no affairs, no debts, no grudges. Just a man piecing together a new normal: weeknight dinners at Applebee's, parent-teacher conferences, Saturday morning pancakes shaped like cartoon animals. The kind of life that doesn't make ripples until something drags it under. And that's what makes this case so unnerving. If Jeffrey Rowland, a man who donated to the food bank, who returned lost wallets, who once spent an entire weekend fixing a neighbor's leaky roof for free, could vanish into violence, what does that say about the illusion of safety? About the monsters hiding in the blandest of places? The answer, it seems, is written in the unlikeliest of ink. A missing person poster taped to the window of the gas station he frequented. A classroom desk left empty for weeks, until the school couldn't bear the silence anymore. And 2 daughters who grew up without a father, because someone decided an ordinary man deserved an extraordinary end. October 11th, 2002, began like any other Friday. The sky over Charlestown was a quilt of gray clouds, threatening rain but never quite delivering. Jeffrey left school that afternoon with a wave to the secretary, joking about the mountain of essays waiting on his desk. He stopped to chat with another teacher, Ms. Alvarez, in the parking lot. She'd later tell police he seemed relaxed, even excited. His daughters, Emily, 12, and Sarah, 9, were spending the weekend with him. "We're going to make homemade pizza and watch Harry Potter," he'd said. "Maybe even let Em stay up past bedtime." For hours, it was that simple. Linda dropped the girls off at 6:15 p.m. Jeffrey tossed dough in the kitchen while Emily grated cheese, and Sarah scribbled doodles on napkins. They ate at the coffee table, laughing at Chamber of Secrets, arguing over who'd get the last breadstick. A snapshot of normalcy, preserved in police interviews and childhood memories. But at 8:47 p.m., the phone rang. Emily would recall her father's smile fading as he listened. His voice dropped to a murmur. "Not here. Not now." When Sarah asked who it was, he ruffled her hair and said, "Just work stuff. I'll be back in an hour." He grabbed his keys, promised to bring back ice cream, and walked out the door. He didn't take his jacket. He didn't lock the house. He didn't come back. The next morning, a park ranger patrolling the C&O Canal spotted a silver Ford Taurus idling near the towpath entrance. Inside, Jeffrey's keys dangling from the ignition. His wallet lay on the passenger seat, cash and credit cards intact. A half-finished bottle of Diet Coke sat in the cup holder, still beaded with condensation. But Jeffrey wasn't in the car. 200 yards east, down a steep embankment tangled with poison ivy and wild grapevines, investigators found him. His body sprawled in a patch of mud, his face a mosaic of bruises. Fingernails torn, neck bruised purple. A man who'd spent weekends hiking these trails with his daughters, now reduced to a cautionary tale, discarded in the weeds like an afterthought. The timeline haunts. At 9:03 p.m., a gas station clerk 3 miles from the canal claims Jeffrey bought a pack of gum, a last transaction before vanishing. At 9:17 p.m., a truck driver reports seeing a man matching his description arguing with someone in a baseball cap near the towpath. By 9:30 p.m., the clouds finally burst. Rain washed the gravel clean. By dawn, all evidence was a ghost, except for one question. What or who lured a cautious, devoted father out into the dark on a rainy October night and turned a promise of ice cream into a death sentence? The C&O Canal towpath is a crime scene's worst nightmare. Gravel that refuses to hold footprints. A river that swallows evidence whole. Rain that scrubs away truths like a guilty conscience. When police arrived that October morning, they weren't just hunting a killer. They were racing against time, against nature, against the suffocating silence of a town too stunned to speak. What they found, or rather, what they didn't find, defied logic. No murder weapon. No blood trail. No signs Jeffrey fought back. His car, parked neatly near the towpath entrance, held no fingerprints but his own. His wallet held $43 in cash. Even the Diet Coke bottle bore no DNA except his. It was as if the killer had floated through the scene like smoke. But there were whispers. A truck driver named Ray Hollis, hauling lumber down Canal Road that night, claims he saw Jeffrey arguing with a man in a baseball cap near mile marker 42 around 9:15 p.m. They weren't just talking, he told police. The other guy was in his face, jabbing a finger at him, like he was pissed. The man was white, mid-30s, average build. A description so generic it could have fit half the county. Detectives plastered the composite sketch on billboards and gas station windows. Tips flooded in. A drifter seen at a nearby 7-Eleven, a disgruntled parent from the school, an ex-con who'd recently moved to town. All led to dead ends. All dissolved like the fog clinging to the Potomac that morning. Then came the rumors. Charlestown is the kind of place where secrets ferment. A teacher at the high school swore Jeffrey had confided in him weeks earlier about seeing something he shouldn't have near the canal. A waitress at the local diner overheard 2 men arguing about keeping quiet the night before the murder. And then there was the persistent, unshakable theory that Jeffrey's death wasn't random, that he'd stumbled into a web of local corruption. The canal, after all, had long been a smuggling route. In the 90s, authorities busted a drug ring using barges to move product. Could Jeffrey have witnessed a deal? A drop? A secret someone would kill to protect? Detectives drained a half-mile stretch of the canal, turning the murky water into a tea-colored puddle. Divers sifted through sludge and shopping carts and beer cans. They found nothing. For months, the case consumed the county. Police interviewed 127 people, Jeffrey's ex-wife, his colleagues, his daughter's Little League coaches. They subpoenaed phone records, traced the call that lured him out that night to a prepaid burner bought at a Walmart in Hagerstown, Maryland. Untraceable. They combed through Jeffrey's life, searching for affairs, debts, grudges. They found a man who balanced his checkbook to the penny, who volunteered at church bazaars, who'd never even received a parking ticket. The frustration was palpable. Sheriff Ed Carter, a 30-year veteran, told reporters, "This isn't some TV show. There's no flashy clue waiting in a locker. We're dealing with a ghost." Then in 2010, 8 years after the murder, a break. Or so it seemed. A local mechanic named Curtis Valles, arrested for meth possession, confessed to Jeffrey's murder in a jailhouse interview. He claimed he'd been high that night, that he'd attacked Jeffrey for looking at him funny near the canal. He even led police to a rusty pipe he insisted was the murder weapon. But forensics found no trace of Jeffrey's blood. No witnesses placed Valles near the towpath. His timeline shifted with each retelling. By the time prosecutors dug into his past, they discovered a history of false confessions. To a robbery in Martinsburg, an arson in Winchester. Valles, they realized, was a lonely man addicted to the spotlight of infamy. The case went colder than ever, but the questions refused to die. Why did Jeffrey's killer leave his wallet and car untouched? Robbery wasn't the motive. Rape was ruled out. This was personal. Brutally, intimately personal. The kind of rage that demands a face-to-face confrontation. The kind of violence that leaves a man's hands broken from trying to shield himself. And what about the phone call? That 46-second conversation that pulled Jeffrey away from his daughters, out into the rain? Who had that kind of power over him? A student's parent? A friend? A stranger with a gun to someone's head? Theories fragmented the town. Some whispered that Jeffrey's ex-wife, Linda, had ties to a shady ex-boyfriend. But she'd been at a PTA meeting that night, alibi airtight. Others pointed to a disgraced school board member who'd resigned weeks before the murder amid embezzlement rumors. But without evidence, speculation curdled into myth. By 2015, the case file gathered dust. Detectives retired. Leads fossilized. Technology advanced. DNA phenotyping, genetic genealogy, but the samples recovered from Jeffrey's nails and clothes were too degraded, too contaminated by years of improper storage. The killer's identity, if encoded in those cells, would remain a locked vault. Yet the weight of the unsolved pressed down on Charlestown. Parents kept their kids off the towpath. The middle school installed security cameras. And every October, when the leaves turned blood red, someone would tape a fresh flyer to the gas station bulletin board. Who killed Jeffrey Rowland? The answer, it seems, is written in the gaps. In the 22 minutes between Jeffrey leaving his house and buying gum at that gas station. In the shadowy figure in the baseball cap who vanished into the Appalachian night. In the lies someone still tells at family dinners, in church pews, in the mirror. Because here's the truth about small towns. They're prisons of proximity. Everyone is watched. Everyone is known. And yet, someone in Charlestown drank coffee the morning after the murder, read the headlines, and said nothing. Someone attended Jeffrey's funeral, shook his daughter's hands, and swallowed the truth. Someone still breathes the same air as the rest of us, their guilt coiled like a dormant virus. All it takes is one slip. One confession whispered on a deathbed. One stray DNA match. One tipster too heavy with guilt to stay silent. Until then, the case remains a wound. A question mark etched into the canal's weathered stones. A reminder that justice isn't just blind, sometimes it's comatose. Small towns are built on two currencies, gossip and silence. In Charlestown, the first flows freely, over church potlucks at the post office, in the bleachers of Friday night football games. But the second, silence is what you bury. The truth's too ugly to say aloud. The suspicion's too dangerous to share. And in the case of Jeffrey Rowland's murder, that silence has thickened over 22 years, hardening into a wall between what might have happened and what someone knows did. Let's start with the theory that clings like a stain. This was personal. Jeffrey wasn't a man who made enemies. But what if his kindness masked a secret? A former student, now in her 30s, anonymously posted online that Jeffrey had once intervened when a parent screamed at a teacher in the school parking lot. The guy threatened him, she wrote. Said, "You'll regret sticking your nose where it don't belong." Police dismissed it as hearsay. But what if that parent, or someone like him, nursed a grudge? Others whisper about a shadowy figure from Jeffrey's past. A college roommate who owed him money. A neighbor whose affair he'd accidentally uncovered. Even his ex-wife's family, who allegedly resented his custody arrangements. But without evidence, these theories dissolve into the realm of campfire ghost stories, terrifying but intangible. Then there's the canal itself. In the early 2000s, the C&O Canal towpath was a paradox. By day, a scenic escape for birdwatchers and history buffs. By night, a haven for drifters, drug dealers, and those who thrived in the dark. A park ranger who patrolled the area in 2002 described it as lawless after sunset. You'd find needles in the porta-potties, he said. Prostitutes working the parking lots. Meth heads sleeping under the bridges. Could Jeffrey have stumbled into a random act of violence? A meth addict desperate for cash? A transient with nothing to lose? It's possible. But here's the catch. Nothing was stolen. Jeffrey's wallet, watch, and wedding band were all left behind. This wasn't a robbery. It was a message. But the most chilling theory lives in the town's underbelly. In 1998, 4 years before Jeffrey's murder, a local construction company was accused of dumping toxic waste into the Potomac. The scandal vanished from headlines after a key witness, a school janitor, recanted his testimony. Rumor has it Jeffrey, ever the history buff, had been researching the case for a lesson plan. He asked me about it once, a retired teacher admitted in a 2017 podcast interview. Wanted to know if I remembered the names of the guys involved. I told him to let it go. Some stones are better left unturned. Was Jeffrey's curiosity a death sentence? Did he uncover something that powerful people needed buried? The truth may lie in a box of his belongings seized by police. A box the Rowland family has never been allowed to see. Then, in 2010, the confession that cracked the case wide open and shattered it into dust. Curtis Valles wasn't a criminal mastermind. He was a 38-year-old mechanic with a rap sheet of petty thefts and DUIs. But when he told his cellmate he'd killed a teacher back in the day, the cellmate smelled a payday. He tipped off police, and Valles, eager to negotiate a lighter sentence, spun a detailed confession. He claimed he'd been high on meth the night of October 11th, 2002, and ambushed Jeffrey near the canal after a botched attempt to steal his car. He fought back, Valles said. So I grabbed a rock and smashed his face in. He even led detectives to a moss-covered pipe near the towpath, insisting it was the murder weapon. But Valles' story unraveled like a frayed rope. He couldn't describe Jeffrey's clothing. He misidentified the car model. The pipe he found had been visible on Google Earth for years, rusting in plain sight. Most damning? DNA tests found no trace of Jeffrey's blood, only algae and the fingerprints of a curious raccoon. Valles eventually admitted he'd concocted the story after seeing a true crime show about the case. I wanted to feel important, he told a reporter. For once in my life, I wanted people to listen. But here's what no one can explain. How did Valles know about the baseball cap? In his confession, he described the killer wearing one, a detail police had never released to the public. Was it a lucky guess? A slip of the tongue from a drunk cop at the local bar? Or proof that Valles had inside knowledge? The question lingers unanswered, feeding the darkest theory of all. Someone in Charlestown knows who did this. Someone who tipped off Valles to muddy the waters. Someone who still laughs at birthday parties, coaches Little League, passes the Rowland family in the cereal aisle. Their guilt a heirloom they'll take to the grave. The Rowland family exists in purgatory. Emily, now 34, wears her father's wedding band on a chain around her neck. I used to dream he'd walk through the door and say it was all a mistake, she said in a rare 2019 interview. Now I just dream of the man in the baseball cap. I scream at him to turn around, but he never does. Sarah, the younger daughter, avoids Charlestown entirely. She changed her last name, moved across the country, and tells people her father died in a car accident. The truth is a black hole, she said. It sucks you in and never lets go. As for the town, some still leave flowers at mile marker 42 every October. Others cross the street when they see Linda Rowland, as if grief is contagious. The local paper stopped running anniversary articles a decade ago. Nobody reads them anymore, an editor shrugged. But in 2022, a Reddit thread titled Jeffrey Rowland, "What Aren't They Telling Us?" went viral. Anonymous users swapped wild theories, government cover-ups, serial killers, a secret double life. None held up to scrutiny. All proved the same point. We'd rather invent monsters than accept the simpler, scarier truth that evil isn't a shadowy figure. It's the neighbor who waves hello, the friend who remembers your coffee order, the face in the mirror that lies without blinking. So where does that leave us? With a timeline full of holes. A killer who either never existed or walks among us. A family suspended in grief. And a town that, for all its whispered theories, holds its breath when a stranger asks too many questions. The answer is out there. Someone's husband knows. Someone's mother knows. Someone's child knows. But in Charlestown, silence isn't just golden, it's survival. And until that silence breaks, Jeffrey Rowland's murder will remain what it's always been, a ghost story with no ending. A riddle carved into the bark of a sycamore tree. A lesson plan left unfinished on a desk, waiting for a teacher who will never return. Charlestown, West Virginia, is the kind of place where front porch swings creak in unison with the rhythm of daily life. Where the diner's pie flavors are debated like philosophy, and the high school football team's wins and losses stitch the seasons together. It's a town that wears its history like a well-loved flannel shirt. Comfortable, familiar, a little frayed at the edges. But beneath that veneer of normalcy, there's a fracture. A crack that formed on October 12, 2002, and has been widening ever since. Jeffrey Rowland's murder didn't just steal a father. It stole the town's ability to pretend, to believe that bad things only happen elsewhere, to assume that darkness stops at the county line. Today, the C&O Canal towpath still winds through the landscape like a scar. Tourists hike its trails, oblivious to the way locals hold their breath as they pass mile marker 42. They don't notice the makeshift crosses nailed to trees, the sun-bleached teddy bears left in the brush, the way middle-aged men instinctively check their rearview mirrors when parking near the trailhead. But Charlestown hasn't forgotten. Here's what happens when a small town stops trusting itself. Neighbors who once waved to each other now peer through blinds. Doors that stayed unlocked for generations sprout deadbolts. Parents escort their kids to the school bus, even though the bus stop hasn't moved in 50 years. At the Piggly Wiggly, strangers are met with polite smiles and sideways glances. And every October, when the air turns crisp and the leaves blaze red, the town tenses, as if the calendar itself is a trigger. In the middle school where Jeffrey taught, his absence is a quiet tremor. A faded plaque hangs near the gymnasium, engraved with Mr. Rowland, who made history come alive. Students shuffle past it daily, few pausing to read the words. But every now and then, a curious kid asks, "Who is that guy?" The answer varies. Some teachers say he died in an accident. Others bluntly, he was murdered and they never caught who did it. Either way, the lesson is the same. Safety is an illusion. Danger wears no mask. For Jeffrey's daughters, Emily and Sarah, the town's grief is a double-edged sword. "People mean well," Emily said in a rare interview. "But when they tell me they pray for us, I wonder if they're really praying for themselves, for the guilt they carry." Sarah, who left West Virginia at 18 and never looked back, puts it more sharply. Charlestown loves a tragedy, as long as it's not theirs. But this isn't just about one man's death. It's about what his unsolved murder represents. Cold cases are tragedies of erasure. Time bleeds memories of their color. Witnesses move away. Detectives retire. Files yellow in evidence rooms. Even the landscape changes. The gas station where Jeffrey bought gum is now a Starbucks. The payphone he used that night was ripped out in 2008. The towpath's gravel has been replaced twice. But for those who loved Jeffrey, October 12th isn't a date on a calendar. It's a scream frozen in midair. A scream that never lands. Consider the rituals that keep the wound raw. Every year on the anniversary, a handful of locals gather at dusk near mile marker 42. They light candles, say prayers, and leave handwritten notes weighted down by stones. We remember. Justice is coming. Who did this? By morning, the rain or wind scatters them. The ritual isn't for Jeffrey, it's for the living. A way to say, we haven't quit, even as they know deep down they might have to. Then there's the guilt. In small towns, everyone is a detective. The retired mailman wonders if he delivered a threatening letter and didn't notice. The bartender at the Rusty Nail replays conversations with regulars, parsing every slurred joke for a clue. The woman who babysat Jeffrey's daughters still wakes at 3 a.m., haunted by the thought that she saw a strange car circling the block that week. Or did she imagine it? And then there are the stories that mutate with each telling. A man at the VFW swears he saw Jeffrey arguing with a state trooper at the diner weeks before the murder. He didn't. A TikTok conspiracy claims Jeffrey was killed by a satanic cult. He wasn't. A self-proclaimed psychic insists his body was moved from another location. It wasn't. The truth becomes a game of telephone, distorted by fear and time, until even the facts feel fictional. But here's the unspoken truth. Jeffrey's murder holds up a mirror to Charlestown, and the reflection is unbearable. It forces the town to confront its own fragility. The idea that goodness is no armor, that trust can be lethal, that evil isn't a stranger but a shapeshifter living next door. The killer could be the man who bags your groceries, the woman who teaches your Sunday school class, the teen who mows your lawn. Or maybe they're gone, buried under a false name in another state, their guilt rotting alongside them. For the Rowland family, the lack of closure is a life sentence. Linda, Jeffrey's ex-wife, still receives crank calls every October, voices whispering, "I know who did it," followed by dial tones. Emily scans every crowd for a face that matches the composite sketch, though the man in the baseball cap would be in his 50s now. Sarah changes her phone number every 2 years, but the nightmares follow. And yet, the case's longevity has birthed a perverse irony. Jeffrey Rowland is more alive in death than he ever was in life. His name trends on Reddit every October. True crime podcasts dissect his story in 12-part series. Tourists snap selfies at mile marker 42, their Instagram captions dripping with faux gravitas. Standing where history died. But for Charlestown, the fascination feels like violation. Their trauma has become content. Their loss a spectacle. So why does this case still haunt? Because it's a riddle without an answer. A math problem that defies logic. A lesson plan with the last page torn out. Because every time the town thinks it's ready to move on, a new tip trickles in. A drunk's confession at a bar, a deathbed whisper, a DNA test that goes nowhere, and the wound reopens. Because closure isn't a switch you flip. It's a door you walk through, and Charlestown remains stuck in the hallway, holding its breath. Because the alternative, accepting that justice may never come, is a poison too bitter to swallow. And because, in the end, Jeffrey Rowland's murder isn't just about Jeffrey. It's about every person who's ever lied to themselves, saying, "This couldn't happen here." It did. It can. It might again. And until the day someone speaks, truly speaks, the town will remain haunted. By a ghost. By a question. By the paralyzing truth that the worst monsters aren't the ones in the shadows. They're the ones who smile at you in broad daylight. There's a weight to silence. To the things we don't say, the secrets we keep, the truths we bury because they're too heavy to hold. But somewhere in that silence, in the space between a breath and a lie, someone knows what happened to Jeffrey Rowland. Maybe it's a detail you've dismissed as too small, a rumor you laughed off as too absurd, a memory you've locked away because it hurts too much to unpack. This isn't just a story. It's a plea. If you know anything, pick up the phone. Call the number on your screen. Tell the police about the conversation you overheard at the diner, the argument you witnessed in the parking lot, the name your uncle muttered in his sleep. Because Jeffrey's daughters deserve to stop staring at strangers' faces, wondering if one hides their father's killer. A town deserves to stop holding its breath. Until then, the Potomac River keeps carving its path through the hills, indifferent to the secrets it carries. The towpath's gravel still crunches underfoot, the sound echoing like a question mark. Autumn leaves fall, as they have for 22 years, burying the past under layers of decay and renewal. And in Charlestown, the same whispers drift through the streets, clinging to porch swings and empty classrooms. Who killed Jeffrey Rowland? Why? How? The answers are out there. Maybe in a locked drawer. Maybe in a guilty conscience. Maybe in a confession waiting to be unearthed. But until then, the only thing louder than the truth is the silence that suffocates it.